I touched on this a little bit on a previous video, but I had bought a computer this past week, and it had arrived with a malfunctioning GPU. Well, actually, to be honest, the video card just didn't work at all. And that's disappointing because it was not a cheap computer. It was a RTX 4090 in there, and you know, it's just not cool when you think, okay, I'm gonna buy this thing and it's gonna be great, and then it shows up and the thing just doesn't work. And then on top of it, it's hours of trying to figure out, you know, what's wrong with it. Is it just something obvious, and am I missing something? And you know, there wasn't any sign of damage on it. It was just kind of, you know, looked brand new, looked great, but did not work. And so that was probably 6 hours out of my day. And then the following day, I ran it down to the computer store and had some other people look at it just to get a second set of eyes on it and verify, you know, it was indeed a dead video card and not just me being crazy and missing something obvious. So long story short, now I've got this computer back in the mail on its way to be returned to Amazon. And I say all of that to say that it's really easy to talk about being super positive in life when everything is going really positively, when you don't have anything that throws a curveball at you. And yet the crazy thing is, you're only one small event away from putting yourself to the test. So you can be thinking that that ship is good to sail in the calm seas of the harbor, but when you get out there into the open waters, that might be a different story. In any case, it's hard for me to say that the persecution of getting a new gaming computer that just has to be returned is the most terrible thing that could happen. I mean, it really is not the most terrible thing that could happen. It's not really all that terrible at all. The reality is it probably just costs me the time of sending it back in the mail and waiting, and then I can buy another one. And probably the other new one will not be broken. It's not the end of the world. But it did give me a day that was a little bit frustrating. I thought I took a day off work to sign for this thing that's coming in the mail and then get it set up and all that stuff, and it turned out to be just a day of frustration instead of a day of fun. And then, of course, I thought to myself, well, you know, that's like a slap in the face, isn't it? But let's stop and rewind the clock. 4 years will rewind in my life. About 4 years ago this time, and the years start to blend together, oddly, but somewhere in there. There was a point where all of my credit cards were completely maxed out. I lost the ability to even make payments on them. Then they got shut down, and I lost half of my income in a single year, and had to cut back on a lot of things, and went through a period of time when, you know, I just didn't even know 100% surely that I was going to have a place to live the next month. Like, that's how bad things had gotten. And that was kind of a rough situation. I remember going out to a cheap restaurant with my then wife, now ex-wife, and we were sitting there having these sandwiches, and I just remember thinking to myself, this is a luxury I may never again get to have, because I'm so deep in the hole, I don't even know that there's a way I can get out. And, the way things were between us at that time, she didn't really contribute anything to helping us get out of the hole. If anything, I felt like I was worrying about how to figure out to make sure that we weren't going to be homeless, and she was ready to go back out for another little shopping spree at the Ross or the TJ Maxx. So it was one of those things where, on top of it being really a challenging time, it was a time where I felt like I was not alone, but I was lonely because I didn't have any help bearing the burden. I had the person that should have been there to make things, if anything, a lighter burden, kind of, throwing gas on the fire. That's how it felt. In any case, the point I'm getting at is that was a pretty rough time, And back then, I worked the night shift at that time, and I remember just, hit rock bottom, and I didn't even have enough money to buy something like some ramen noodles or something for my lunch break, and at that time, that was kind of strenuous work. Like, it was not just sit in an office for a few hours and then go home. It was, you're on your feet, you're moving for 12 straight hours. So not being able to have anything to eat for a shift is, that's a wake-up call. So all things considered, there was a lot of different things that had contributed to that. I had lived beyond my means. I married somebody who was probably a worse steward of money than I was. And then there were other factors that just kind of came together to create the perfect storm. And so I had to do some real major changes in my life, and then as it all turned out, that kind of was the bottom, and then from there on it was upward from there. And my wife left, and that was a mixed blessing. It's hard to say that that's a blessing because it's not really what I would have wanted to happen. And yet the truth was, whenever she wasn't around, suddenly it was easier for me to make the changes I needed to make to be okay in life. And that particular topic is, I'm sure, something I could talk about in more depth at a different time. But the real point I was getting at with all of this is 4 years ago, when I thought, I don't even know if I'll be able to buy food for myself or have a roof over my head or buy a sandwich. At that point, I didn't think there was a future for me to have a opportunity at all to be buying a new gaming computer. Now, fast forward 4 years, and life is totally different. Now, there's some things that I wish I had, but in terms of the situation I find myself in today, I don't have any debts, and I don't have any worry about what would happen if I lost my job, or am I going to be able to pay the bills? I could walk away from my job if something came up that made me feel like I needed to go. If somebody asked me to do something that I thought was unreasonable or unethical, I could just head out because I have that safety net now, and I didn't used to have that. And I can buy a new gaming computer, and if it doesn't work, it's truthfully not affecting me at all because the one I have works just fine. The entire point of getting another one is just because that's my hobby and I want to stay ahead of the curve. So it's a totally different situation I find myself in. And I don't say that to brag. I say that because going back to those feelings of being frustrated, those feelings of thinking, my goodness, things just are not going well at all today. Well, they sure are going a lot better than I ever thought they could go just a few years ago. And when things are kind of going well, then we raise our threshold of expectations. And we continue to find things to be frustrated about, things to complain about, things to use as evidence that our life is in some way not good enough. And yet, the truth is, most of us do have blessings in our life. And it's important to remember the blessings at those moments when we're tempted to be pessimistic about something. Ultimately, the little things that come along in our day to frustrate us are probably not worth being frustrated about. And you know, I'm reminded of the Bible story, and I've thought of this many times, and just because I like this story so much as an allegory for life, it's the children of Israel, the Jews heading out of Egypt, and they're going along. They get out of Egypt, they're free, they're not slaves anymore, and they're trying to make their way now to the promised land, to their new home, and they're off in the desert. And there's this manna that comes down from heaven. It's like some kind of magic sweetbread that comes down, and they can eat it, and it sustains them, and it keeps them well and healthy. And then they get angry, and they get frustrated because it's the same old thing every day. And they say, well, you know, we might have been slaves back in Egypt, but at least we had onions and we had meat and stuff, and, you know, now we just have this stupid bread. And then to teach them a lesson, they found that there's all of these quails that came out and just dropped dead right there where they were, and now they had this huge abundance of meat, but it turns out that it was toxic, and as they ate it, those who ate it died. And so sometimes that can happen to us. We leave behind captivity. We leave behind the life of slavery and the chains and the shackles that held us back. We cut those cords and ties. We become more free. But then we start to have these feelings that it's not good enough. Things aren't happening fast enough. And we get impatient. And then we start looking for ways to fulfill our desire instead of being patient in the circumstances that we have been presented with. And if we're not careful, we wind up like those Jewish people on their journey, eating the poisoned quails. We wind up having attitudes that become toxic in our life because we allow those seeds of discontent to become dominant voices in our minds. So whenever you're starting to feel like life is frustrating, whenever you're starting to feel like there's maybe not a lot of cause for faith, take some time to think about the things that have come into your life that are good things, the growth that you already have achieved, the things which once upon a time you might not have ever thought were going to be in your reach, which are now in your reach. You know, like to go back to my computer story, after I ordered this computer, I'd paid off the credit card that I purchased it with, because I always use a credit card to make my purchases because I get points for it. So I make this purchase, and then I immediately paid off the full balance. So then I was thinking, well, they're going to refund this thing and it's going to go back to the original form of payment, which is now a card, which has a 0 balance on it. So then I'm going to have a negative balance on my credit card. And I'm going to have to call the bank and ask them to transfer that balance from the credit card to my bank account or something like that. Again, not a big deal, but you know, one of those things that comes across as a frustration when you know, when you make an order and then you have to return it in the mail. But then I was thinking, like, isn't that crazy though? Like, right now, my frustration is that I paid off a credit card and it has a 0 balance and I'm going to get a refund to a credit card with no balance. Versus a few years ago, having all my credit cards shut down because I'd maxed them all out and defaulted on them, you know? Or I get a letter in the mail from the IRS saying that I didn't pay my taxes, even though I did. And I have to call them on the phone to give them my check number and verify that I did, in fact, make the payment. And I do that call, and then it's all done. It's an hour and 20 minutes on the phone to sort out something. You know, I'm thinking, well, isn't that like, you know, that's some crap, right? You pay your taxes a month early, and then 6 months later you get a letter saying you still owe a balance. And it's just because somebody at the IRS did a typo. But then again, goes back to, I look back at a time in my life, which was many years of my life actually, where tax season was a stressful time. Because it was really a question whether I was going to have enough money to pay whatever I owed to the IRS. It was a stressful time because I already had kind of overextended myself. I was already down to the wire, so I couldn't afford to have any surprises on the tax bill in April, you know. And now, you know, my biggest problem with the IRS is, you know, they did a typo and I have to make a phone call to correct some small clerical error. You know, these kinds of things, though. You know, I look back at the job I used to have. Like I was saying, I used to work the night shift, and it was hard. It was exhausting. And there's nothing worse. I mean, I guess I take that back. There are things worse. But it is not a fun feeling when you are struggling financially and you don't know how you're going to even make ends meet. And then on top of it, you have a stressful job that taxes you physically and mentally. And on top of that, there's that daily stress of wondering, am I going to be fired because maybe I didn't do well enough or something, you know? And that was my life. Long hours and stress and financial difficulty. And I don't have to worry about that now. Now I have an office job. I work 5 days a week during the weekdays, and I have the weekend off. And I have a boss who's understanding and respectful to me. And, you know, again, that's not something I would have seen before either. When I was grinding on the night shift, I did not anticipate that a few years later I'd be, you know, maybe complaining because a day at the office was boring. Like, that's about the worst complaint I could possibly have about my job right now. Maybe it's a boring day at the office, right? You know, I started watching Jeff Favignano, and he's another YouTuber. He does videos about games like American Truck Simulator and Flight Simulator. I think he might do some Grand Theft Auto videos and some stuff like that. But Anyway, I watched his videos because he made American Truck Simulator driving videos, and I liked those. And it was actually while watching, or rather listening to one of his videos, he was talking about his own life story, how he had been struggling in life, and then he got this book called The Secret, and he read it. And that's all about this concept of the law of attraction, that you think about good things, you meditate on good things, and those good things tend to come into your life. And he said it transformed his life because he changed his attitude, and then his life changed too. And then he explained how, as the years had passed, he looks back and he realizes that he is now a blessed man in ways he didn't ever think was possible. He has a successful relationship in his life. He's got the financial success. He's able to make money doing what he loves. And it all just kind of happened after he started to change himself. And it's so true, though, and I think, to me, I've kind of felt the same way. When you start to make changes in your life, in your attitude, in your outlook, and you start to invite peace and tranquility and positivity and kindness to others, but maybe even more importantly, kindness to yourself, because you can't be kind to others if you are cruel to yourself. Then one day you just look back and you realize a lot of blessings have come into your life, and the problems you have are so much smaller now than what they used to be. And the crazy thing is, you don't even really notice. What is that transition point? What is that moment when you arrive? You don't really know. You don't see that so much. It's just, you stop thinking so much about poor me. You stop thinking so much about being angry about life. You stop looking at life so much as a burden and as a never-ending struggle, and then you just live. And it's like driving that truck down the road. At some point, you stop thinking about counting every single mile, and the road just goes by, and you're just flowing along. And then, before you know it, you look out the window and you realize that you're actually at the place where you were trying to go. And it didn't seem like it was even so very hard after all. There does seem to be a certain strange law in life that the less you strain at things and the less you try super hard, the more likely you are to get the things that you're looking for. It's kind of like being stuck in quicksand. The more you flail around and struggle, the more stuck you become. But when you surrender a little bit and you relax, then you're able to break free. There was some vines like that in the Harry Potter movies. It was Ron Weasley, I believe, who fell into the vines. The vines would grab you, and they would choke you, and they would strangle the life out of you. But if you relaxed, and you stayed calm, and you didn't struggle, then they also would relax, and they would set you free, and you'd be able to pass through them without any problem. That's how it is in life. When we stop struggling and we find calmness and we find peace, then all of those extra things will be added unto us in their appropriate season. So I will close with this thought from Ecclesiastes: cast thy bread upon the waters, for it shall return to you after many days. As always, wherever you find yourself on your journey, very best of luck to you. stay positive, stay happy, and till next time, thank you.